morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. My name is Mark Evanier. Welcome to the Sergio, Mark, and Thomas panel. The three of us have recently done a comic book which will be coming out any day now as you're watching this, called Groo Meets Tarzan. A little while ago, we did a book that you hopefully purchased called Groo versus Conan. We'll be talking about both of those. The gentleman over here is Mr. Thomas Yeates. The gentleman over here is Mr. Sergio Aragonés. For the benefit of those people, Thomas, who are interested in funny comics, not in adventure comics, would you tell these people a little bit about what you've done besides these strange Groo crossovers?
Well, this is obviously the most important thing ever in my career. So, if you want to just stop here, I understand. But yeah, there was some other things before. I started off mostly at DC Comics in the early 80s, drawing the Swamp Thing, which is hence this silly shirt. And I got various different jobs for the various different companies, Time Spirits, Zorro, bunch of Tarzan comics, bunch of mythology stuff, all kinds of things, book illustration, and met Sergio at conventions. Everybody sees Sergio at conventions, and I thought, hey, this guy is okay. I'm going to see if I can get to be friends with him. Fortunately, it worked out. We ended up working together.
That's great. I believe you have another credit you should mention.
Oh, yes. There is one more. That's true. Like I say, it's, no big deal compared to Groo Meets Tarzan. But I also am I lucked out and I got this dream job to illustrate the old Prince Valiant Sunday newspaper strip. So I've been doing Prince Valiant, and if it's not in your local paper, then call them up and complain.
Yes, and you can find them online also, and they're quite beautiful. And I think anybody who has the gall or nerve, I guess, would be to draw Prince Valiant has to be a pretty secure artist to follow in that tradition. And you are holding up that tradition very lovely. It's a very wonderful looking strip these days. Now the other guy here, Sergio. For the benefit of those people who only care about adventure type comics, would you tell them what you've done?
Well, don't forget, I have many more years than you guys together. So I started in Mexico, of course, where I grew up, drawing whatever chance I had. I had a magazine, one of the important magazines in Mexico, called Mañana Magazine, and I had a page of cartoons. I realized that the market was the United States because it had much more magazines doing humor. I immigrated. Fortunately, as soon as I arrived, Mad Magazine liked my work. I started with them in 1962 doing magazine cartooning. And that's what I did. I did a lot of extra jobs around. After a trip to Europe, I came back and I started doing comic books for DC Comics. Curiously, I started writing comics before drawing comics. I got fortunate to meet one of the Mad Magazine illustrators. And here's where Mark enters because he finishes all my works.
Joe Orlando. This is all I do in life.
And Joe Orlando needed some scripts, which is a long story about the young romance. And that's how I started my career, comics writing. Then I did a few others, and then I started entering my artwork, and I worked for that. And eventually, I created my own character, like with the enormous help of Mark Evanier, of course, who was indispensable for me. And I did Groo the Wanderer, and I've done all kinds of other comics through I think, over half a century that I've been doing this. So including Sergio Aragonés Funnies, Solo. We even, Mark and I did The Spirit for a while. So for 12 issues. So it's been a long varied career.
Yeah. Okay, now Thomas, how long have you been doing comics? How many years?
I think my first job was a backup story in Sergeant Rock, came out 78 or 79.
So you've been doing comics, therefore, for 41 years? Okay.
You say so.
Okay, I've been doing comics for 52 years. So between us, you and I have been doing comics for 93 years. So, Sergio, unless you have been drawing comics for 93 years, you have not been doing them longer than both of us put together. You are a much younger man than you think.
Well, I started the comic book per se career when I had been already working in maths in 1962. So I started the comics in the late 60s or early 70s.
Unless you broke into comics like 10 or 15 years before you were born, you have not been doing comics longer than the two of us put together.
I will. I will.
Okay.
Give me a little more time.
Okay.
I'm rooting for you.
Then Tom and I have to quit. I've been writing comics for years, and the most relevant thing that I've written is that there was a period in my life for a couple of years when I wrote the comic books of Tarzan of the Apes and Korak, Son of Tarzan, which you probably never saw because they were only printed in Europe. They've never been published in this country. Sergio might have. Well, you were back in this country by then. Nobody. There are people who read them in other lands in the mid '70s. So doing Tarzan is kind of a return to that. All three of us have an affection for the character of Tarzan. Sergio, when did you discover Tarzan?
Oh, I was a kid. I grew up without television, of course, in Mexico. It was on the late 40s and early 50s. So basically, I read. Books are my background. Books are my inspiration. And of course, adventure books were the thing. Jules Verne, Alexandre Dumas, and of course Burroughs, because when I read Tarzan, that was when he became my favorite character of all of them, because it was easy to become here. You just have to be born in the jungle. The other characters were complicated. You have to become from an army, to be a musketeer, or you have to be a scientist. But Tarzan was so basic. You could be Tarzan so easily. And when I play Tarzan. I fell a few times from trees. But Tarzan was probably the character that I loved the most as a kid, besides a pirate written by an Italian guy called Emilio Salgari, which nobody knows, but he really was the master of piracy. He wrote Sandokan, the Black Corsary, the Red Corsary. He did everything. He was fantastic. And that was fun too.
But you have a connection to the world of Tarzan through your father.
Yes, but it was not Tarzan. It was Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. That was the connection.
Well, tell them the studio that he managed.
Well, he was. I have to go to the beginning because it's very strange. My father came as a refugee with me, of course, and my mother. And in 1942, we arrived to Mexico. He started trying, like every refugee, trying to get jobs. And one day he read in the newspaper that they needed extras for a movie, Spanish-looking extras, because it was a movie about the Mexican independence from the Spaniards. So they needed the Spanish army to look Spanish, not Mexican. So he applied, got the part, realized that you could make very good money doing nothing except putting a costume and doing whatever they told you at the set. He fell in love with the industry, started as an actor. He was a founder of the Actors Guild in Mexico, because politically he was very involved in Spain. That's where he emigrated. And with he helped Jorge Negrete and Cantinflas and everybody to do that union. Discover production, get into production, and started from the beginning until he produced his own movies. So my youth was very much related to the movie making because of the studios. I had a whole cowboy set over there. I have interiors to play detectives. I have everything. And one day, I was a diver. I love diving. And we were training to go for a dive underwater competition. And it coincided with my father being the executive producer for Rodriguez Brothers, Ismael Rodriguez, who was directed episodes called Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. And Papa, what are you doing here? Are we doing this? Oh, I want to meet Gina. Here's Macala. Oh, no, she's not here today. We're doing some stunt shows, but it happens that the stunt person hasn't shown up. Oh, okay. Well, we were talking, and my father suddenly comes to me and says, we need you to do a stunt. And says, sure, what do you want me to do? He says, well, we want you to dress like Sheena and put the costume and the wig and jump from a tree into the water. I says, well, sure, I do whatever. They pay me? I says, yeah, sure. So I was not muscular build. I was thin. I was a swimmer, diver. So they handed me the costume, which fit pretty good, and then the wig. And from liana, I don't know how you say a liana.
Vine.
A vine, I had to jump and dive into the water. And so camera ready, everything. I went like that, left the vine and jumped into the water. Caught. That's it. It's only one shot because the wig is destroyed and we cannot do it again. So that was it. I did a stunt for Sheena. Never met the actress, which I wanted to. And that was probably in 53 or 54 or 55, around there. I don't remember exactly.
Now, what was the name of the studio?
Churubusco, that was where they were shooting. But we were in a country, on a place where it has a river and a lagoon called Las Estacas.
Okay. But those areas and Churubusco Studios where they filmed a lot of Tarzan movies. A lot of the Tarzan films over the years were done there. So you kind of played in that arena as a child. That's the point I was going to get to.
Very much so.
All right. Now, Thomas, when did you discover Tarzan? What age?
Oh gosh, I first saw the black and white movies on TV probably, pretty early on, 5 years old or something. They'd show them in the afternoon, and then which in the matinees, which was annoying because there I'd be sitting at school very bored and thinking, boy, there might be a Tarzan movie on TV. Maybe if I was sick tomorrow, I wouldn't have to go to school. But my mom figured that out after a while and didn't work very long. But that's where I first exposed to Tarzan. And some of my very first drawings were I think my first ones might have been Peter Pan, because I've been digging through archives in the last years and found some real early stuff. But the Tarzans, I remember drawing him in first grade. I was 6 in first grade.
Were you drawing Johnny Weissmuller?
Well, it was just Tarzan. I didn't even know the actor's name, probably.
But you were drawing the Tarzan you saw from the movies.
Right. And
when did you discover Tarzan in books? And when did you discover Tarzan in comics?
So then, at some point, I had an uncle who had a cabin up at Lake Tahoe. And it was a very rustic old log cabin. And it had all this fun stuff, pennants and stuff stuck to the wall. It was right on the lake. And funky little cabin. And there was a bookshelf. On the bookshelf was this old Tarzan of the Apes novel, an old cloth dust jacket. It didn't have it was cloth bound hardback of Tarzan of the Apes, a real early edition. And I saw it, and I'd never heard that title, Tarzan of the Apes. And so I pulled it out as a kid and looked at it. I go, wow, this is a whole book of Tarzan. And it has this beautiful, kind of 20s or teens even style, fonts that are very illustrative and very different than what you would see in the 50s and 60s as far as the typefaces and stuff. And it had this illustration of this silhouette of this guy who wasn't big and muscular. He had long hair with a headband and a locket hanging from a necklace. I go, wow, this is Tarzan? This is really different Tarzan. And so that kind of opened my eyes to there's more to this guy than those movies I'd seen. And then some years later, I was at Tower Books in Sacramento. I was 11 years old with a friend and his father said, if you promise to read the book that you pick, I'll buy it for you. Pick any book you want. If you promise to read it, then I'll buy it for you. And I went through the bookstore very, very methodically, and I came up with Tarzan of the Apes, a paperback, the Valentine paperback, that would have been 1966. I was 11. And then that was it. That was it. I was lost.
And what was the first comic, either newspaper strip or comic book Tarzan you experienced?
Solardo's Tarzan newspaper strip was carried in my paper. And so I had seen the John Solardo newspaper strip and I liked it a lot. I'd also seen the Jesse Marsh, which didn't do that much for me back then. I love his work now, but I liked the Solardo was a little bit more illustrative. And Jesse Marsh was okay, but I wasn't a big comic book fan. I wasn't that big of a comics nut yet. But I saw the Solardos. But what also really got me, I'll have to wave Doug Wildey's flag here a little bit, is in '69. I was still reading the original run of Tarzan and amongst lots of other stuff, novels, and I saw Tarzan at the Earth's Core Gold Key comic book in a 7-Eleven. And I remember the guy barking at me to put the comic book down if I wasn't going to buy it. And then I actually bought it. And I didn't know who the artist was, but the art really knocked me out. It was Tarzan at the Earth's Core adaptation by Gold Key with illustrations by Doug Wildey. And I was real impressed with his art in that.
Now, I have known for years, seen people who I've almost seen fistfights erupt over people's version preferences for Tarzan, and there are people who would tell you that nobody drew Tarzan for the comics better than Hal Foster, and there are those who tell you nobody did better than Bern Hogarth, or people would say Jesse Marsh, people would say Russ Manning, people would say Joe Kubert.
Right.
I happen to love what Doug Wildey did, and you're one of the first people I've ever heard who he only did about 5 issues of it, I think, but. You're one of the first people I've heard mention that, which I think was a wonderful version of Tarzan. Sergio, I know you were very partial to Jesse Marsh in the comics.
Yeah.
Thomas, do you have a favorite in any of those? And is your Tarzan that you draw influenced by any of those people in particular?
Well, my 2 favorites are probably Foster and J. Allen St. John. They're very different, but between the 2 of them, they kind of got it covered. But what Wildey did, one of the things that was so impressive about Wildey was that he was adapting an actual Burroughs story, pretty faithfully. And he used photographic reference, and he had a beautiful pen line. And it was like you were seeing some scenes, the ones where he really got into it with the pen and ink and the photo reference and rendered the heck out of it. It was like you were looking at a Tarzan movie that was actually based on a Burroughs story, which has never really happened to Burroughs fans' satisfaction, and there it was. Doug Wildey was kind of achieving this sort of an effect with Law of Opar and Nakima the Monkey and everything. So there's a lot of Joe Kubert stuff was absolutely incredible. When I met him at a convention early on, before I'd really gotten into the comics business, we hit it off because of both of us had this affinity for the character of Tarzan. And he subsequently wrote me and said he was starting his school in New Jersey, which I then went to.
Because I don't see your Tarzan as looking particularly like anyone else's. I think it's out of your own imagination, maybe it's such an amalgam that it's unique.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I remember when I first got to do Tarzan, I saw Joe at a convention and showed it to him. And he thought it looked sort of like his work, which was, very amusing to me. And I said, well, I wasn't trying. It just kind of came out the way it came out. And he laughed and said, yeah, my sons say that too. But there is different influences for different aspects. Kubert was incredibly inspired by Hal Foster's Tarzan. Obviously, he's a big Foster guy. And both of those guys, I try to, and I don't think I'm successful at it, but I try to incorporate that movement and energy that's in those drawings that they did. But I also love the old illustrative stuff. I love the St. John has this kind of elegant delicacy to it that conjures up this previous era of heroic fantasy, kind of pre-Marvel. It's a different vibe to it, and I'm real attracted to that. But you know, the other guys were great. Manning, I love Manning's work. I think Manning's probably the most popular Tarzan artist. Really, I remember he got reprinted more than everybody. I think because it sold.
Well, yeah, Manning's Tarzan was phenomenally popular around the world, not just in this country. One of the problems that the Kubert Tarzan had, we don't spend too much time on this kind of talk, but when the Burroughs people were licensing Manning reprints overseas, that's what Tarzan looked like in every country, the Manning version. And when they needed more stories, the local artists in different countries would ape the Manning version. They would draw basically using his comics as a model sheet. No pun intended there, okay? And then all of a sudden they try to sell the Kubert version, which displaced it in America. And a lot of the foreign countries didn't want the Kubert version because they had, hundreds and hundreds of pages of the Manning version by their own artists and by Manning that they were reprinting, and it didn't fit in. Now, I think Sergio would like to say something on behalf of Jesse Marsh, because, and Jesse, we should also mention that most of the Jesse Marsh issues, most of the Manning issues, and most of the Doug Wildey issues, all the Doug Wildey issues, were written by a man named Gaylord Dubois, who wrote more Tarzan comics than anyone alive, a recipient last year of the Bill Finger Award posthumously. And he had the unenviable task sometimes of taking an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel and adapting it into two 24-page comic book stories. And I don't know how he did it. It was impossible that he telescoped those things down and sliced them and diced them to put in there. But Sergio, like me, first discovered Jesse Marsh Tarzan comics.
Right.
Sergio?
Yeah, well, don't forget that in Mexico, comic books didn't arrive until much, much later because they had to be translated, and the distribution was nil. So after I read the books, probably one or two, because there was all the characters that I also loved very much, like the Three Musketeers and the Prisoner of Zenda. It was so many characters. But Tarzan also influenced when the neighbor guys and I, my group of kids, we went every week to the local theater, which we could go without parents or anything because it was just the local theater. And there was the first Tarzan movie that I ever saw, who was Johnny Weissmuller, one of the earlier ones, because I'm talking in the late 40s. Well, once we saw the movie, that was it. Every kid was going that Tarzan out all through the movie, and outside, the only thing you could hear was, every kid was doing it, and we were totally fascinated by the movies. Not the Elmo, whatever, the first one, but and I never saw a comic book of Tarzan ever until I came to the States. So the only comics that arrived to Mexico were certain, like the Disney comics, Little Lulu, and some DCs that was the Batman and the Black Hawks, but none of Marvel. They never came until later. But on my youth, comics didn't exist except those, and the movies and the books that I remember as a very young. And when we talk about Marsh, is, to me, one of the very few. I didn't like the plots that much. They were too kind of infantile in a way. They were jumping too much. But the stories, when he drew, he had such a respect for the people of Africa, for the native people. He didn't make fun of them. He didn't westernize them with the bodies. All the other artists make all the natives with European bodies, like the early illustrators. But Marsh did them the way they were, short, muscular, and also a respect for people that they were not very thin. It was the respect that he had for Tarzan. I think he was so respectful with the animals, with the backgrounds, never distracting. It was such. I felt very enamored with his work. But that was, as I say, later when I started discovering comic books, and I love the work of course, the school where I met with Tom was
Joe
the
Kubert.
Kubert school. I used to go to the DC Comics, and I'm talking in the 60s, and sat at his office seeing him drawing. And he was, to me, one of the fastest artists that there ever was. Not only that, he could start from the top of the page, drawing some leaves, and then he was drawing at that time Sergeant Rock, and he will suddenly put a helmet and then a face, and he'll start from the top, and suddenly he put an enemy face, and it appeared like in an old Walt Disney movie when a brush went like that, and the page appeared. The man was so fast and so accurate.
I wish I knew a guy who could draw that fast. I wish I knew in my life some
Nobody can
artist.
draw that fast. Yeah, I know where you're going. No. Tom Yeates, when he draws a hand, he has to draw a perfect hand, because if he draws a bad hand, it's a bad hand. So he has to spend the time making a good hand. So those Kubert and so those all the other guys, they have to do the anatomy correct, because a little bone out of place, it's a bad drawing, no matter how you look at it. So it has to be carefully, with time, done. In caricatures, I take a pencil, take a lapis, I have to draw a hand, and I go like this, and there's 4 sausages. Didn't take me any time, you know. So the time in caricature doesn't exist. Is that if you try to, okay, so you draw a realistic Tarzan, it will take me longer than Thomas Yeates. Imagine.
That's long.
But because you put attention to what you do, you cannot mess it up, because it'd be a bad drawing. It has to be proportionate. It has to be the right perspective. Everything has to be correct. Caricature, no, we exaggerate. So the speed, you want to do a face, you just go like, It takes 4 seconds, and you have an expression in caricature, you know. It doesn't matter. So the speed doesn't balance with realistic art and cartooning. No.
I have spent several decades around comic book people and artists and writers, and I cannot tell you the number of times I have heard 2 artists sitting there saying, I could never do what you do, and the other guy says, well, I could never do what you do.
That's right.
And it is
Absolutely.
and they're frequently both right.
It's totally true.
Yes, and so there are people who look at what Sergio does and they describe it in the same terms that he just described Joe Kubert's work.
Right.
And they're both right. I mean, Joe Kubert was amazing. What he could draw, but so is Sergio, so is Thomas. I mean, it's anyway. Now, and we've all established here now that we have all this great love and respect for Tarzan. So why did we have him meet Groo? Why would we do that to beloved Tarzan? Why would we break that wonderful tradition of Tarzan and stick him in a story with Groo?
Because we had to do one before, which was Conan.
Right.
And before we can talk about Tarzan, we have to talk about the Conan work that the 3 of us did.
That's right.
And that took a long time, because I don't like crossovers at all. I think that is an affront to the writers, to the creators. I think it's a business deal from the publishing houses to get the fans from both characters that they are mixing around. So the time that they told me to do a crossover, I always said no. Why? Because I respect when they talk about Conan, and it probably took a year before we decided to do it. And then it took many more months to come with the idea of how to do it. Because the crossover to me was, how can we offend the readership and the author that is already gone to take their characters and make it ours? We don't have the right to do that. Well, eventually, yes, but mixing it up with other characters that they don't belong in that universe, or in that, let's call it universe to call it something, not Tom. So when it came to do Conan, that was it. I wasn't going to do it, no matter what happened. But we figured it out that if we could work it well, make it not a real crossover. So Mark and I have done a lot of work together as characters. So we figured that if we are the characters in the comic book, we are breaking that barrier. Nobody can say Groo is meeting Conan or Tarzan.
Right.
Sergio and Mark are meeting Groo and Tarzan.
They're imagining.
Imagining, dreaming it, all kinds, but it's us. Not so I figured out, yes, we can do it if we introduce ourselves. Right. Mark?
I guess so, yeah. Okay.
Well, then what happened is that, okay, let's do a Conan, but now we can't because Conan cannot defeat Groo, and Groo cannot defeat Conan. The people who read Conan is not going to accept it. The people who read Groo don't believe that Conan can defeat Groo, for heaven's sake.
Of course not.
It took months of going to the coffee house and talking about it, how we do it, blah, blah, blah. And one day I'm watching a movie by Akira Kurosawa called Rashomon.
Rashomon, yeah.
It's a story told by three different people, completely different. So called Mark and perfect, that's absolutely the idea. So the Conan Groo fit the thing. We have it. It was a lot of fun. In one issue they meet, in another Groo Conan win, and we leave it like he won, and in the other one Groo wins. And but that was told by a drunk guy who wanted to get some free beers in a bar. So he says, "Oh, I saw the great fight between Conan and Tarzan, beat the crap out of Groo." And that's how the comic ends. Remember, Mark? Yeah.
I don't remember. I don't read these things.
Yeah. All right. And then it evolved. The good people at Dark Horse owns the right to publish Tarzan. So we figured out for a long time, how can we do Tarzan that it's viable? Well, again, we have to be there to break the universes. Now we have to include this universe. And then we came with the stories, and it worked, And we make it a comic book convention that was a lot of fun to draw, and we went from there.
But we should mention that I think it was you mentioned Dark Horse, so I think we should give Mike Richardson credit for the initial suggestion that you have Conan meet Groo. Yes. Which, of course, Sergio dismissed because Sergio is a man of honor, and he doesn't not want to tarnish Robert E. Howard's great legacy by, And I knew, I know
of the fans.
Yeah, I knew Conan fans who were like, they really winced. But when they saw it and read it, they saw that we treated Conan with respect. He wasn't, he was Conan.
Yeah, no, you have to. First of all, you can't out silly Groo. If you made Conan silly in any way, it wouldn't work because the story is about the clash of two very different dynamics. Now, in both series, we have the pages which have Sergio and me on them, which Sergio draws. We have the pages that have Groo on them, which Sergio draws. We have the pages that have Conan or Tarzan on, which Thomas draws. But there are also pages that have Groo with the real hero, the adult realistic hero.
Real.
Okay, and people here watching this are going to ask, how the hell do you guys do a page that you both draw when you do not share a studio and you live 1,000 miles or a couple hundred miles apart?
A little longer.
Thomas, would you care to explain how that works?
Sure. So when Sergio writes this story, he sketches out cartoons, really quick cartoons helps him to write the story. And then Mark gets it, and he rearranges stuff and kind of turns it into a more solid.
He makes it good.
Piece of comic book, He
makes it good.
Good. I never thought of it that way. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So well, whatever he does his part, and he just makes it flow a little better. Let's put it that way. And that goes to me. But I have Sergio's original sketches, and so there are pages that Sergio draws and leaves a space for me to put my characters or my backgrounds in, and there are pages that I start the page and then I leave empty areas for Sergio's characters or backgrounds or pages. And then there are pages that are all mine where I just do my own thing. I do my own layout or whatever. But I have to say that a lot of the time, the layout, the basic layout of my page, which is a very important part of comics, is the composition, are Sergio's, because his layout is so clear. The storytelling is so clear in his layout that I would often he would keep saying, no, draw your own. This is just for me to help me write it. But why do extra work? It's that his layout worked so well, particularly in the Conan, because there was a fight, because they were fighting each other. That was versus, Groo versus Conan, whereas this is Groo Meets Tarzan. So,
but now, Thomas, you are taking a page, you're taking, and you are penciling the drawings in, and you are generally inking them at that time as a unit, and leaving holes here and there. And then the page goes to Sergio, and Sergio gets Thomas's page, and he adds Groo into it. Now there are places where there's an overlap. There's holes here and there where you're filling in around each other's drawings. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Well, that goes back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, so they didn't come back again. Yeah.
That I get it. He draws Tarzan doing something, and I know where Groo is going to be, and he leaves me the space. So I can do the space, but now I have to put something there that belongs to Tarzan in it. So the page goes back to Tom, and he fills it up again. So it goes back and forth, some pages a couple of times, and not with a computer, because it has to be the original page. So that goes by FedEx. So it's
but there are times when, Sergio, you must mimic his foliage or brush the bushes in the background or the trees a little bit. And Thomas, there are times when you must try to fill in around a Sergio drawing and simulate his line work here and there. Correct?
Yes, that's exactly right. And in the Conan, it was kind of funny because he would going back and looking at it years later. Some places I couldn't tell who inked which, but here you can see. I'll bring this in close, and you can see there's Groo is a little tiny character over here, right? And then I drew everything else and just left Groo. And
who drew the stuff on the ground below Groo?
Good question.
Good question, because
Probably
sometimes he left me a lot of space to be comfortable because of the proportion between Groo. Groo is a small people.
I'm on a Zoom call.
Groo is not a tall guy. Groo is short.
Okay.
And I'm chubby. So usually he's about half the size of Tarzan or half the size of Conan. So that's a big problem, because he had to leave me the space. So I have to make leaves. Probably all these leaves around here, close to him, are mine, or these. But that's it. Not much more than that.
All right.
Yeah, it's whatever pages we took, like when we did the cover that you mentioned, so I had to draw some leaves around Groo.
Oh yeah.
Very close, because I had to do like this, but I had to copy his leaves from here, like this type of leaves. This I had to copy because they were too close from Groo. So probably I drew this one around here with the little eyes.
Hold on, I'm going to move Sergio. Wait a minute. Sergio, hold that page up again, Sergio. I'm going to move you full frame here for a second. All right. Now point to what you were pointing to.
Like many of the leaves of drawn by Thomas here, right? Or the ones over here. See, which is terrifically.
Those are all
Then,
Thomas's up,
absolutely.
framing.
But then I had to draw this one because it's in contact with my root and with a little jokes here with the little animals scaring the characters. So that was it. So to put it all together, I think he must have drawn something more around here, because this is sort of like a white space. So I don't know in the cover if that was corrected by more leaves drawn by him.
I don't think so.
Thomas, hold up the page you had there again.
He's got that one. The only one I could find with Groo in it, I only have a few of these originals handy, is this one here, where you can see the Groo character being confronted by Tarzan and the other characters that I drew.
Yeah.
And I remember one time talking to Sergio a long time ago, well, probably during the Conan project, where he was saying how he draws leaves like this, but other artists draw leaves like that. And he imitated my technique of doing ferns. I do these ferns. I say I have this way I figured out. It's the formula for drawing ferns, different angles. If you do them in silhouette, it's real easy. And if you don't do them in silhouette, it's more tedious, but anyway, I have these tricks, and he imitated it for me.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, you are doing most of your foliage and bushes with a brush, and he is imitating it with a pen.
Yeah, probably. Yeah,
With a pen imitating a brush.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
Now the finished cover of Groo Tarzan looks like this.
There you go. Yeah. So see, they did leave that around.
Yeah, it worked nice with a color, of course.
And for the color, we should mention a very wonderful artist named Thomas Luth.
Oh my God, yes.
Who does our coloring and such. And we should also mention that the lettering is in the Groo Conan crossover books was all computerized lettering. It was all done by computer. But in this Groo Tarzan series, we had Stan Sakai hand lettered the Groo pages and the Sergio Mark pages, and the Groo balloons and the sequences where Groo is interacting with Tarzan. And then the Tarzan lettering was all done by computers, because that's where the lettering is done in the Tarzan comic books. So we have what might be the very first comic book ever done that has computer lettering mixed up with hand lettering.
Three different fonts.
Different fonts, yes.
Groo font, Tarzan font, and
Sergio Mark font. Right. Anyway, it becomes very complicated, obviously, to do that way. Now, after Groo Conan, we followed up with Groo Tarzan, which took a long time to do. We should tell people. Oh, wait a minute. Let me go to full page, full screen Sergio, if he's going to show us a double spread here.
Oh my God.
Okay. This is a double spread. This is pages 2 and 3 of the Groo Tarzan series.
That happens on a comic book convention.
Of the first issue, yes. This is a scene at a comic convention. And
nobody can draw those like Sergio. Nobody will.
Yes, yeah. Yes. And that is not only, we should point out, that is not only a comic book convention, that is this year's ComicCon in July of San Diego, in San Diego. In an alternate universe, it actually took place, and we set our comic in that, retroactively.
Right. It's all planned.
Yes. How long did it take us to do Groo Tarzan?
Took me too long. I'll tell you.
Okay. Well, you've got another job. Actually, Thomas, how much time of your week is spent drawing Prince Valiant?
Pretty much all of my work time. That I can stand being at the board doing this kind of high concentration. It's labor intensive, and I get antsy, and it's hard.
And I would imagine it's also research intensive as well.
Very research intensive. Yeah. So, but it's probably at least 4 days of work minimum. Sometimes it goes over 5 or 6 days, depending on how complicated it is and how much time I have to put in after I pencil it and ink it to get the coloring right. Because I work with a colorist who sends me his colors, and then I art direct them a lot.
You are drawing, though, you are drawing a smaller Prince Valiant page than Hal Foster had to.
Yes,
His
yes,
comic strips have all gotten smaller since then.
but they're still large. I mean, the Prince Valiant pages are still. Let me pull one out here. You know, they're, you can see it as compared to me. You know, that's how big it is. It's pretty big. It's bigger than your average comic book page, which of course doesn't. There is no average comic book page now because they're all done on computer, so it doesn't have any real dimensions.
Yeah.
In the old school sense of the word, but no, it's oversized. I work large. I like to work large.
Yeah. And one thing that both of us do, Thomas and I, is research. I mean, even though what I do is in a caricature form, when I draw, like this is in this case, an African village,
Right.
I have researched that type of art, that type of drums, that type of architecture in certain village to make the more believable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you see Tarzan appearing for the first time, you know, it's a wait a minute, where's Tarzan? Oh, and then we go combine pages and everything. Oh, it's a lot of fun. It becomes great because you have to respect the points of view of your other artists. In this case, Tom, because he's the only guy I have ever done a crossover with. But the majority of these pages in number one, is more introducing Groo that is going to meet Tarzan, and the real adventure starts in number 2 and 3 and 4. You know, but it was a lot of fun doing it. And you have to respect the time because again it has to look realistic. And also we have to think a lot, the three of us, about not to break Tarzan's universe and not breaking Groo universe. So you have to meet in between. That's something that can happen in both universes. And we didn't have to use magic in it because usually that's the escape the majority of people do, a crossover. By magic, suddenly all the character appears and that's it. No, this was real. It just happened that when you read our comic, you'll see it because we don't want to give away too many of the details, but it worked perfect. And at the end, it cannot happen again by a physical thing, not by a magic.
You had asked me about where my Tarzan comes from, and I just kind of, over the course of this, I realized that a lot of my art comes from old movies. I love the old black and white movies. I like working in black and white and put a lot of brushwork in there. And there was a Tarzan serial that Burroughs produced in the 30s called The New Adventures of Tarzan, starring Herman Brix, otherwise known as Bruce Bennett, more famous for being the guy, the prospector who gets shot in Treasure of the Sierra Madre with Humphrey Bogart. Anyway, his depiction of Tarzan in that serial was Burroughs' Tarzan. It wasn't the Johnny Weissmuller Tarzan. It was the real Tarzan from the novels. And that depiction of Tarzan is and they actually filmed it on location in Guatemala. It's a pretty amazing serial. So I was very inspired by that portrayal of Tarzan in the way I drew him, particularly in this one. You know, it's kind of that look. He looks like Bruce Bennett a little bit, his hair and stuff.
Okay. It's amazing how every artist has their own vision of the characters that they draw. You know, and many artists draw themselves as the character.
Sure.
Because they're fortunate, they're handsome, and so they draw themselves as the main character. Because like the Rocketeer, it was exactly a self-portrait because it just happens that the author was kind of handsome young men.
Well, let's face it, a lot of cartoonists aren't, but they draw themselves handsome anyway. I have said for years, Sergio is the only cartoonist I've ever seen who, when he caricatures himself, makes himself look worse than he actually is. He makes himself look, very stupid and goofy and things like that. And he's a good looking man.
Well,
People are looking at you now, Sergio, and for an hour now they've been trying to read your glasses and see what you're looking at.
no, what happened is that these glasses are uh, convex or concave, whatever point you look at them. So normal glasses like those, they reflect the light on an angle, but they are flat. These are round, so no matter where the light come from, I cannot fix it no matter how. It had to be a special lighting or something. But no matter where I look, I cannot do it. If I take them away, I don't see anything. Boom. I bang myself around. So imagine, but no, drawing itself in cartoon form, that's easy. You just take a place, put a big nose, put round eyes, put a mustache like that, and then go like that, and then put some hair and a smile, which helps also. And then you have it. It's not complicated.
Right.
So
Anyway. Sergio, have you gotten since we have finished our end of this? People who are watching this when the video goes up will not have seen the whole series yet. I think the first issue will be out of Groo Tarzan. But we finished the whole thing? Have you gotten Tarzan out of your system? You always wanted to do a Tarzan story. You did a Tarzan story. Do you have a yearning to do another Tarzan story in you maybe someday?
Thomas or me?
You, Sergio.
No, of course not.
Thomas will do other Tarzan stories probably, but
Correct. I
You
would
know,
go
maybe.
Groo, but I don't think we'll do any more crossovers because there's no need. And
you said that after the last three. But anyway, so,
last two, did we do a third?
well, we
crossover?
did. We did Sergio Destroys DC. We did Sergio Massacres Marvel. We did Sergio Stomps Star Wars. There's
Oh,
something else
yeah.
in there.
But
All
in
of a
this
sudden,
case,
other people were intersecting with our world in there.
yeah, but don't forget that in this case, I didn't ink the pages. We were still doing Groo, and it was impossible. I did the pencils, and then the artists who were our guests, which I think it was a great series, did their own part. But mostly it was written by Mark because I don't know anything about comics. I had never read, to tell you the truth, I have never read a superhero comic ever in my life. I don't consider Batman a superhero because he's a human. Well, but I have never read really a superhero comic. But Mark knows them by heart. He knows everything from every universe. So those three series, the one of Star Wars, I knew more. Also, like we played that better. But Sergio Destroys DC and Sergio Massacres Marvel, that's Mark Evanier's knowledge of superheroes. He knows.
You're not going to pin those on me, fella. Oh, it's okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to wrap this up here because I think we've come to a good stopping point. It has been a
Oh no.
pleasure working with Thomas on this series
Thank you.
because Thomas gives Thomas gives a credibility to these projects that and I'll tell you what it reminds me of. It reminds me of the fact that when they did the movie Airplane, the movie studios kept saying, well, why don't you get Tim Conway to play the part? And why don't you get Harvey Korman to play the part? Why don't you get Dom DeLuise to play the part? And the producers said, no, we've got to have Leslie Nielsen and Peter Graves and Robert Stack. We've got to do those straight.
Yeah.
And Thomas is a funny, clever guy, but he had to suppress the funny part of him in order to do Tarzan absolutely straight. And the pages he did could have appeared in any Tarzan comic he did, and it's a funny combination to contrast the two styles, and somehow it seems to work and still has an organic feel to it. And I was very happy when we finished Groo Conan, and I've just looked over all the Groo Tarzan stories again, and the thing kind of holds together. And somebody's calling me now, but anyway, so thank you, gentlemen, for spending this time with us.
Okay.
Folks who want to see Groo Tarzan, if it isn't in your local comic book shop by now, it'll be there any day now. If you want more information, there is a new Groo website online called www.groo.com. There is a brand new Groo website that's up and running, and it will have additional information about all the Groo projects we're doing, including Groo Tarzan. And you should go there at some point and browse around and sign up for the newsletter. Thank you, Sergio. Thank you,
My pleasure.
Thomas. And thank you all for tuning in on this panel. Bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye, guys. What a pleasure, guys. And thank you
Okay.
for watching.
Adios.
No, and we have to do this more often.